Oh, wow. Hey, welcome. This is Dr. John Bush. I didn't know my title would scroll like that. And this is the process. I'm continuing my video lessons. This is 139. RB case study using median consistency as a beta test for this year. I started at lesson 128, kind of setting the foundation for this. I am going to have this article where I kind of shorten all this down in written form. I hate to type, I'd rather run my mouth and talk. But anyway, this is to accompany the article and kind of may give you a little different spin on some of this stuff that I'm going to present. I'll be doing the tight ends next and then the wide receivers with articles as well on the science of fantasyfootball.com website. We may talk about this one in our Data Lab podcast. It's a little short, really focused podcast on the data, as you would predict, being a scientist. So anyway, with that said, let's continue. If you have followed along, go back to the quarterback, lesson 138, because it's the same format here. I'm just, looking at running backs, right? Okay. So what we're trying to do, of course, is have some predictable metrics that we can employ for our 2022 drafting. See what's going on. I was just in a draft 10 minutes ago, and my choice was Ezekiel Elliott, who was 35% median score versus Montgomery at 23%. The ADP said Montgomery, but I decided to go with Elliott just because of the pretty big gap there. So at least that's how I see it, at least this metric. So I was kind of pushing things a little bit. Maybe last year I would have done Montgomery, but I'm trying to push my journey to use these metrics. It's beta testing. So anyway, this table here has the position, the year, the player, and something called average of COM versus games, or it should be games played here, and it's expressed in a percentage. And counts over median is the COM score. So this is a weekly tool using median of performance, a weekly performance that running backs should hit. I believe it was, I think 16.5. If you'll go back to my early lessons, I actually used 2017 through 2021 to establish a median here, looking at all the running backs during that block of time. And then having that number, I went to 2021 and worked across there and found out how many weeks each of these players were above median versus the number of games then total played. And right away, I think the take home is at best, we're talking 7 out of 10 games, and that's Taylor. And look how skewed he was. The next best was 6 out of 10, roughly, with Henry. And then McCaffrey at 5.7, so it's almost 6 games there. Then Eckler, and right now Henry is going below Eckler and McCaffrey, so that is intriguing to me. I would probably take Henry over those two if given the opportunity here. But the take home is a lot of these names you'll see on Twitter, and everybody proclaiming all these, sensational whatever it is they're flapping about. Look at the median here. We're talking in really, at best, half the time or even less. So the less years, the less weeks, you're probably going to struggle with winning, because these wide receivers, running backs are below median. So that's a lot of teams have two. So you do maybe have a little bit of balance there if you pick the right two. But if you do 0 RB, I'm not saying I haven't done 0 RB. I have, and actually made a lot of money when it worked for me. It's been a while, couple years. Actually, 2015, I made a sackful playing. I was just jumped in on a really strange year. You can look at some of my video lessons and see how strange that year was. And I happened to be right on the right path that year. The last couple of years, it's been not as dramatic. So what's going on is, as you're passing down, as you're going down, you're probably not hurting yourself if you go too far down, because you're starting to get at 4 out of 10, then down to 3 out of 10. So one might argue one more victory, less if you wait too late to get, a running back there. So that's something to consider. And some of these D plays, we're talking 2 out of 10. So that means 8 out of 10 weeks, they're sad and not bringing home anything above kind of a score there. So you're probably going to be relying on other players on your team. And again, it is a weekly game and a team game. We are not, looking running back to running back, right? We just look at total scores and head to head, which is good for all of us, right? You try to assemble the best you can week by week. This is just a way, this consistency of the median here, counts over median here, is just a way for you to know what you're getting into. Because a lot of people do not have these numbers at their fingertips. Not once. All you'll hear, well, I'm all in on X, Y, or Z. Well, and then they'll have some reasons, cherry-picked reasons why. I like to let the data steer me, right? And I like to use the data to answer questions. And so this beta test, the question is weekly consistency using median points, is that a process that can lead to more wins, more money in my pocket? That's basically the question I'm testing. And this is a beta test, okay? Because I've never done it before. Okay, that's what it means, beta. And next year I may have to, tweak some things. The process of science is always tweaking and changing. Okay, some people don't like that, but that's just how it is. What we thought we knew 100 years ago is not what we know now in science. It could change daily. Some fields it could change physics and stuff. Some of these new particles can really just change, discovery can really change everything quick. So things can move jauntily in science. Anyway, I'm trying to apply the scientific approach, which is going to be different by many. And you can look on our website, and we talk about the scientific approach and these kind of processes. My partner, Dennis Mitchelson, D. Mike, he's all in on weekly and using science. He's a meteorologist and trained, and I'm a biologist, so we approach it probably way different. There are no experts in fantasy football, okay, because there's no way to get a PhD in fantasy football, okay. People can say, well, I've been playing it for 20 years. Does that make you an expert? I've been chopping wood for 20 years. I'm an expert at chopping wood. I don't know. Are you? Uh, no. So the way we define experts and how experts are in our society is a peer review layered process, right? We're not talking skills, right? We're not talking electricians and plumbers. They're going through a process that's been around before the Middle Ages, right? Guilds and apprentice and master, and that's a kind of a separate deal. It's a hands, it's a tactile, it's a hand-eye coordination. It's a lot of things that people become an expert in, or at least a master apprentice or master electrician, right? But fantasy football doesn't need us to, put new water pipes in or, set up a wall socket. We're using numbers and data analysis. And so that switches it to people who are near that field. Okay, there are lots of people out here near that field, MDs, engineers, data people, data analysis people, but nobody, myself included, does not have a PhD in fantasy football informatics at all. It doesn't exist yet. May one day in information science departments, that would be great to start having degrees in that. That would be really fantastic. I don't think I'll get to see it, but I would love, after I retire in biology, I would love to be a teacher in those type of courses. I think I would have a lot to offer and get such a program off the ground. But anyway, I digress here. Let's move on, because I can keep running my mouth. Here is some more players here, and there's a slow progression down of weekly success, and it gets, like I said, the best is 70, and it drops quick, and it is not a linear drop. It's more probably logarithmic, or the data is not normally distributed at all. So that can be another trick to looking across the data. So I'm doing the best I can in a non-normalized data environment. There are ways to deal with that, but I'm not doing that. I'm kind of making my own ways. So the next block of material, when I apply it to the running backs from 2021, I looked at their current ADP, current in quotes. I think I did this a couple weeks ago, so it may have changed a little bit, but it's pretty close until probably training camp. So ADP and consistency numbers. What I did was normalized or scaled, still not quite sure how I should say that word, but anyway, these metrics for each player is put on a scale of highest 100 to lowest 0. Once you do that in the ADP and the consistency, you can now compare directly one category to the other and actually subtract and get a diff number or difference. And anything that's in a positive difference means that the consistency of the player is much higher than his ADP. And so those will be listed in purple. Those that are dramatically below will have a minus and be in yellow. And then if they're above what the price is, that's called an overlay. If you've ever been to horse racing or other gambling. When you're paying less money to make more money, that's kind of an overlay situation. Your chances are better than maybe the odds would tell you. So you're getting the benefit of the odds with an overlay. Underlay is the exact opposite there. So the biggest overlay in the top consistency plays is James Robinson. I know people are saying, well, ETN's coming in, etc., etc. That could be true, but the price you have to pay, he's not going to be your top selection. Just because he's, what is he, 7th, doesn't mean you pick him in the first round. Not at all. Wait till he's a bargain. And this says when he gets his opportunity, last year he was very consistent. Another one is James White. I understand there's age and it's the Patriots and lots of, rookies and drafting. There's all sorts of whatnot, but he's has a very strong, and again, he could be the last pick. Your your running back 8 or something. You never know, but he was very consistent last year when he got to play. Myles Gaskin was another one who's was consistent. Duke Johnson, another one. So you can start seeing some of the plays there. And the opposite, people like Barkley, David Montgomery, Clyde Edwards-Helaire were the exact opposite. Look at the minuses. They were consistent, but compared to the price you'll pay is too much. They are costing you too much for what you, at least consistency, weekly should pay or would pay, at least if these numbers are real, and we'll know more by the end of the season. Okay, so it's a beta test. And I continue that journey. You can look at some deeper plays, so-called sleeper plays. Maybe a sleeper is somebody like these people. D'Ernest Johnson, Dontrell Hilliard, Jordan Howard maybe, Deonta Freeman, Tyson Williams, Breida Wilson, Peyton Barber, Boston Scott, Bernard. These guys are almost free, a lot of what I just read. So they can be your 8th or 9th pick in a deep bench. Yeah, if I have a thin bench, then you're probably not getting to them. Okay, but if you have a big, deep bench or it's best ball and you got a lot of room for some deep plays, these guys returned pretty good last year versus the price. That's all I can tell you about that. So it is worth keeping track of. And I continue here, and there's some more overlays you can look at. Okay, the next block of material is I sorted the 2021 running backs by their final end of season fantasy points. So we got number, player, team, games played, rushing attempts, receiving targets. Just if you're saying, why are you putting that there? I'm just curious. Is there some component that is more or less valuable in consistency? So I'm setting the table in beta testing to have this to use for next year's test. Okay. And there's a test called the principal component analysis that I can apply to these data slots here. But if you're interested in what that is, I think I've got some video lessons on PCA and you can check that out. But right now, just setting table. This is just something for you to note. But the key here, of course, is the end of the season. And again, end of the season has a lot of weakness, but most people set ADPs based on that a lot of the time. So we can't ignore it. Doesn't mean we follow it, but in looking at value situations, we got to know what people are thinking. Doesn't mean we do that, but it's just we got to know what the public's thinking. And then there's fantasy points per game. And then here's the player's consistency number here, okay, in the yellow. And then I graded every player's consistency basically by 4 quadrants. The highest above average, above the 50%, below average, below 50, and low is below 25%. So you can see right away what players might have been really high in fantasy points, but had a weak journey to get there, maybe less consistent. So they would be trickier for a weekly situation there. And here, of course, are the end of the season fantasy points. Here's the highest and then the above average and so forth. So you can quickly compare and see what's what. And this is, and if you saw the quarterback, this is the lesson or the case study. I'm actually going to draw 3 players that are very similar end of the season points, but very different in how they got there. So I'm trying to tease out the subtleties of this process. And we'll talk about those running backs here shortly. Here's some more of that data. You could look at it. And again, I'm publishing an article, and you could look, at the tables, take a picture of it or whatever, screenshot it. I don't care what you do. Because it changes every year. And here's some more as well. So you can take a look at that. And here's the low players here. So be aware of some of these cats. And then here's some more. So I got you. Everybody you want to know about is in here, right? Okay. And some more. Okay. So you can just roll through this pretty quick. Here they are. Okay. So now we move to the famous case study. Kamara, Jones, Jacobs, 9, 10, and 11th by fantasy points. 234 to 230. 4-point difference. Okay. Certainly Kamara put more points per game. He only played 13, but still, when he was there, he was delivering the goods. His consistency was 100, and that's high. Jones was 72. That's above average. It's not bad, but it's not a Kamara, and it's not high. And Jacobs was really different than these cats, and he was below average. But they were all high in points, but completely different in their weekly journeys. So right away, people would theoretically have trouble picking these. Now, I'm assuming Kamara slips the noose of the legal K. I can't predict that. So yes, if Kamara is suspended for half the season or whatever, yeah, then that changes the math, right? But right now, this is just an example of how we approach my consistency, right? So I showed you about the value, the odds, the underlay, overlay. Now we're talking about the end of the season. They look the same, but they aren't the same by weekly consistency. And so these are the ones we're going to look at. And then I list the weeks, list their fantasy points here on this side, Kamara, Jones, Jacob. And then I colorized Kamara, Jones, and Jacobs. I colorized their score that they did, the raw score. I subtracted the median score for running backs. I think it was 16.5, I think maybe. Yeah, 16.5. And so the resulting subtracted value is shown here. Okay. And then those that are highly positive, that means they had a really good game above median. I put as bright green. So Kamara had 5 spectacular games. Jones had 4. Jacobs had 2. So in some ways, that there it is, Kamara, Jones, Jacob. That's probably the order I would prefer them. The dull green is just barely above the median. I then took the average of each of these weekly activities, and Kamara is a plus 1.6, so he's toughest. But Jones and Jacobs actually were fairly close because Jones had some really sad weeks. Look at this, minus 14, minus 11, minus 12. And Jacobs had a lot of sad weeks, but they weren't just, double digit sad. They were single digit sad, but that's still not good because we're talking 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 below here. I mean, Jones had a lot of that too, but boy, when he delivered well. But because of that interesting journey, they were a lot closer than you might give it here. Here's the points above the median line is the pink, and Kamara's in green, Jones is in blue, and Jacob is in red. And you can kind of look at the plot. And when you plot numbers, that is the numbers, right? But using trend lines can smooth out, buff out some of the scratches there in your data and be a little bit more predictive. So I actually applied trend lines to these three, and I think that's a little clearer if we're trying to break the tie between Jones and Jacobs in some ways. We can debate that, but those are really close. Kamara is certainly above those, but now we're left with trying to tease out the difference. The consistency my metrics would say Jones over Jacob, okay, and it's not close. But if you look and get into the data, it's closer than I would have thought. When we look at trend lines, we can see here's Kamara in green, had kind of some sad early games, but boy, by game 3 to about game 13, he was way above. So he gave you a block here and kind of returned at the end of the season a little bit. So clearly, he spent a lot of his time above the zero, above the median. Good job. Jones was really spectacular, but then dropped low and kind of clawed his way back. Jacobs, on the other hand, spent a lot of time, in fact, most season below. So I think the trend line is that if you kind of try to smooth it out, I would pick Jones over Jacobs because Jacobs really never delivered what I needed above the median as spectacularly as I think. And the trend lines predict that's where he stayed below. So there's nothing to suggest that this year won't be the same. I mean, things change, but that's how I tried to tease out those two players. If you're asking me, would I be surprised that Jones doesn't do good or Jacobs does better? Hey, it's data. It can happen. But that is the kind of where I'm leaving it right now. And that's how I'm using, and that's what I'm using to parse out the data. Okay, I've taken a lot of your time. Thanks for listening. The article will pretty much say a lot of the same things, except maybe not a little bit more concise. And I may have some points that I probably forgot to talk about here. Anyway, my name is Dr. John Bush. This is the process for the science of fantasyfootball.com. Hey, and we got a new thing going. Check all that out. We got podcasts, we got articles, we got fun and games. Well, not really fun and games. This is serious. Money's on the line. So we'll let others play funny games and funny hats and stuff. Put hats on their animals and parade them around. I'm going to try to stick to the data. Okay, we will continue with tight ends next up in our lesson video. Woo woo, this is fun.